Welcome to the deep dive. This is where we cut through all that information overload, we boil down the critical insights from key sources, and basically hand you the shortcut to being instantly well informed. Today, we're doing a deep dive into the practical and philosophical genius of Anne Lamott. We're focusing on her classic guide, Bird by Bird, Instructions on Writing and Life. But here's the thing right up front. This isn't just for people trying to write novels. Our mission here is to pull out her, master manual for overcoming the mental game that comes with any huge, ambitious goal. Think about a big presentation or a major project proposal, maybe a 3-month report you've got to do. If you're someone who tends to get paralyzed by perfectionism, self-doubt, this is your framework.
Absolutely. And it's such a forgiving framework. That's what's great. Lamott, she really shifts the focus. It's not about the outcome, becoming famous or rich from your writing. It's about the process. The big takeaway is that the act of creation itself, just sitting down and doing the work, that becomes its own reward, a really profound one. It's this source of joy and challenge, too. And that's true even if nobody ever sees what you create. It just forces you to be present, right?
Okay, yeah, let's unpack that right away. Starting with that first big roadblock. Just feeling overwhelmed. You're facing what feels like a glacier of a project. The question isn't, how do I write this whole book? It's more like, how do you even start the first sentence? And Lamott's solution, it feels almost too simple, but it's profound. Short assignments.
Yeah. The power of this really hits home with the story behind the book's title. Lamott talks about her older brother. He was 10 at the time. He had this huge report on birds due, the next day.
Yeah.
And he'd had 3 months to do it, but of course he put it off completely, just sitting there at the kitchen table, totally stuck, almost crying.
Oh, I know that feeling. That paralysis is so relatable, isn't it? You have all this freedom, so much to do that you end up doing nothing.
Exactly. And their dad comes over, sees him breaking down, and just puts his arm around him, and he gives him the only advice that could possibly work then. Bird by bird, buddy. Just take it bird by bird.
Yeah.
And that becomes the core strategy, for moving forward when the sheer size of the task feels impossible. You don't write the whole report, you just write about one bird.
So it's not just a cute story, it's actually a brilliant way to reframe how we think about time and tasks. Is the real genius here just realizing the project feels hard only because we see it as this one massive solid block? We beat the glacier by treating it like, I don't know, a bunch of tiny pebbles?
That's exactly it. The paralysis kicks in when you try to hold the whole enormous thing in your head all at once.
Yeah.
Lamott basically says you have to trick your brain. And the practical tool she gives us for this, for forcing that small focus, is the 1-inch picture frame.
I love this idea, this visualization. So when the panic starts rising, that inner voice telling you you're not good enough or you've got nothing left to say, you stop. You breathe and you narrow your focus like crazy. You're only allowed to describe what fits inside that tiny 1-inch frame. You don't worry about the whole chapter, just one little scene, maybe one memory, or maybe even just a single paragraph.
Right. And she gives this great example using a memory exercise about school lunches.
Yeah.
Really specific sensory details. The point is to focus on stuff you'd normally just ignore, what your teachers wore, what the cafeteria floor looked like, what other kids' lunch made you jealous. That tight focus, it forces out these authentic, specific details.
And the details that pop out when you force yourself into that tiny frame, they can be really surprising, like the specifics about those code lunches she mentions. Lamott talks about these strict rules, especially around jams and jellies, and how much emotional weight they carried.
Yeah. Grape jelly was like the safe bet, the winner. She calls it a nice, slippery, comforting, sugary petroleum product, which is just fantastic language. But then there were the risky jams, the ones with negative vibes, like raspberry.
Oh, that description of raspberry jam, it's so vivid because she explains why it was bad. Those tiny seeds just ruined everything. It was too much happening in raspberry jam, too many seeds per spoonful. It felt like tiny little pod people, or my favorite body snatcher jam. You can't enjoy your sandwich if you think pod people are invading it.
Yeah, exactly. The detail makes the memory real. And here's how it connects back to the creative process for you listening. That super detailed, tiny focus on jam. It unexpectedly led her to remember the boy against the fence. She didn't consciously know he was important or even usable. But focusing intensely on the lunch bag stuff led to this organic discovery of this quiet, meaningful character from her past.
So the lesson is pretty clear then. Small, deliberate steps, focused attention. That's what leads to the bigger discoveries. You don't find the story by looking for the whole story. You find it by looking really closely at, maybe just a piece of jam.
Okay, so if short assignments help you handle the sheer scope, the second crucial thing for keeping momentum going is embracing the shitty first draft. The SFD.
Right, the SFD. The moment you give yourself permission to just write badly, it's like the whole project just cracks open. Because the biggest danger to that bird-by-bird approach is probably that inner editor, right? The one that wants to polish step 1 before you've even thought about step 10. How do we get around that voice?
You get around it by understanding that the first draft, she calls it the child's draft, has a very specific, almost sacred purpose. It has to be uncensored. It has to be totally self-indulgent. It's the draft where you're allowed to be messy, overly sentimental, even, let a character just say, well, so what, Mr. Poopy Pants? You absolutely need that freedom.
I think that's maybe the most liberating idea in the whole book, that the child's draft isn't just something awful you have to suffer through. It actually has a real productive point. Because, let's face it, there's zero chance you're going to get to that really great, useful paragraph on page 4 without wading through the first 3 pages of, well, terrible, clunky, rambling stuff.
It's the necessary groundwork. You have to do it to find the clarity you didn't even know you had. That clarity is hiding underneath all the mess. And Lamott is super practical here. She gives this brilliant structure for revision, breaking the work into 3 distinct drafts. Each one has a totally different job.
Okay, let's break those down. This feels like a really key takeaway for structuring any big project, even if it's not writing a novel. First up is the downdraft. You just get it all down on paper. The messy, unfiltered brain dump. Just generate the material.
Exactly. Then comes the updraft. The downdraft gave you the raw clay, right? The updraft is where you start shaping it, fixing it up. You focus on making sure things are accurate, that it flows okay, that the characters, or maybe your key data points if it's a report, are consistent. Does the basic structure actually hold together?
And then finally, the most intense stage, the dental draft. This is where the really meticulous editing kicks in, like a dentist checking every single tooth. You check every word, every sentence to see if it's, as she says, loose or cramped or decayed. It sounds exhausting, but you can only really do it effectively once you've got that solid structure from the first 2 drafts.
And the whole reason we need the SFD and this kind of structured drafting process is because we're almost always battling these psychological roadblocks that pop up the second we try to create anything. And the biggest one has to be perfectionism.
Right. Lamott calls perfectionism the voice of the oppressor, which is such a powerful way to put it. It just tightens you up, cramps your psychic muscles, stops you from moving freely. Tidiness makes it feel like things are finished, like they're as good as they'll get. But creativity, writing, it needs room to breathe and move. She actually says, quite brilliantly, that messes are the artist's true friend.
Yeah, perfectionism is really just fear wearing, I don't know, a fancy suit. And she describes that internal chaos, that constant back and forth between self-criticism and ego, as listening to radio station KFKD, K-fucked, all day, every day.
That is such a perfect metaphor for the anxiety that comes with creating things. You've got the right speaker telling you how amazing and unique you are nonstop, and then the left speaker is just this rap song of pure self-hate saying everything you do is garbage. She points out you need things to be quiet to actually hear your characters or, hear your own real voice.
Exactly. And she offers this incredibly practical, maybe slightly absurd technique to deal with it. The mason jar technique.
Yeah. The mason jar. Okay, tell me about this. It sounds weirdly therapeutic. Imagining my inner critic as a tiny mouse.
It does sound a bit goofy, yeah. But she defends it by stressing the need for containment, for setting boundaries.
Yeah.
So when that internal chatter starts, those high-maintenance critics like the inner parent, the jealous colleague, the harsh editor, you isolate each voice. You picture it as a mouse. You pick it up by the tail, metaphorically, of course, and you drop it into an imaginary mason jar, put the lid on tight. You're not killing the mouse, you're not silencing it forever, but you are separating it from your immediate workspace.
Okay. So you kind of acknowledge the noise, you hear their angry squeaking for a second, but then you just turn the volume way, way down. The mice can keep banging against the glass, but you, the writer or the project manager or whatever, you're free to get back to the actual work. It's like an externalization trick to get some mental distance.
Precisely. It helps you see those voices as separate things, not as like the fundamental truth about your own worth. It's all about creating that safe space needed for the messy downdraft to actually happen.
So why put ourselves through all this? The mousetrapping, the terrible drafts. Lamott says it's because the real reward is profound and it's actually immediate. She says when writers are truly in it, writing well, they feel better and more alive than pretty much any other time. It's about letting those true words that are already inside you finally get out.
And she uses this really strange, kind of visceral image to nail the point. She compares the relief and satisfaction of getting the work out to milking a cow. She says, the milk is so rich and delicious and the cow is so glad you did it. What she means is that creative urge. If you ignore it, it builds up inside, becomes uncomfortable. The cow feels better after being milked. The person feels better having externalized the work. That feeling of relief, that flow state, that's the real payoff, not necessarily money or fame.
Okay, so moving past those initial hurdles, Lamott also talks about how we actually discover the story or the characters while we're in the middle of it all, which brings us to the Polaroid metaphor.
Yes. This is such a great metaphor for anyone facing an unknown outcome, which is exactly what a first draft always is. Writing that first draft is like watching an old Polaroid picture develop. You start by just pointing your camera at whatever grabs your attention. Maybe it is the stuff in a lunch bag, or maybe it's a specific event that struck you, like the Special Olympics she mentions.
Right, but the thing about Polaroids, the old ones anyway, is you couldn't know exactly what the final picture would look like until it was done developing. While it's still that weird grayish-green soup, you just have to trust the process. Then, as it clears up, you start seeing things you didn't expect, shadows, details, maybe a flash of color that hits you in a strange way.
Hmm. She talks about watching this heavily handicapped runner really struggling, and then later looking at a photo from that event as it developed. And in the picture, there was this man looking at himself and his friends, and he just declared, that is one cool man. That little statement, that unexpected detail that emerged from the photo, that became the heart of the article she wrote. The finished picture held knowledge the photographer didn't even have when they clicked the shutter.
So the idea is that discovery just sort of emerges. It's a result of just sticking with it, focusing persistently. You write to figure out what you actually believe, what you know deep down.
And this focus on emergent discovery carries right over into how we understand our characters or, in a business context, maybe our key stakeholders or the core problem we're solving. She uses the metaphor of the emotional acre. Every single person, every character is born with one of these emotional acres. And they get to choose what they plant there. Is it like a beautiful orchard full of fruit trees? Or is it more like a rusty, forgotten auto-wrecking yard?
So the writer's job isn't really to invent their emotional landscape from scratch, but more to discover what's already planted there, to figure out what they care about most within that acre, because that, in the end, is the core of the story. That's what's at stake.
Exactly right. If you truly know who your characters are, what drives them, what they value, and what's genuinely at stake for them, the plot just kind of follows naturally from that. This is why Lamott is famous for telling her students, plot grows out of character.
Which is such a massive relief if you've ever just stared at a blank page trying to force some kind of beginning, middle, and end onto it. She argues that if you try to impose a really rigid, complicated plot structure onto your characters, it just feels fake, manufactured. It becomes, as she says, onomatopoetic, P-L-O-T, like the sound of something heavy just hitting the floor. Thud?
Right. The real goal isn't some clever, intricate blueprint. It's about creating a vivid and continuous dream that the reader can just step into and get lost in. And that dream gets shattered instantly if the reader senses the author straining too hard, manipulating things just to make the plot work.
Okay, so wrapping this up, what does all this mean for you, the listener, as you tackle your next big, ambitious project? We've talked about short assignments to beat the overwhelm, embracing messy drafts to shut down the inner judge, silencing those internal critics, and letting the story or the data or the argument kind of discover itself. It seems pretty clear there's no magic password, no fantasy key that's going to suddenly unlock the whole process.
That really is the crucial bottom line. She tells this story about her son, Sam, who once locked himself out of the house trying to use his cheap plastic toy handcuff keys on the real door lock. Obviously, they were useless. Only his fucking keys, as Lamott puts it, the real, heavy, brass ones, could actually open the door. And she assures us, fantasy keys just won't get you in. This whole process is about persistence, it's hard work, and it's about having faith in the process itself, even when it feels messy.
But committing to that hard work, the focus, the showing up day after day, that's actually what reduces our sense of being alone. And it deepens how much we appreciate life itself. It genuinely feeds the soul. The real reward becomes learning how to be a giver, whether it's giving to the reader or the client or your colleagues.
It really is about connection. And speaking of finding your truth and making that connection, Lamott leaves us with this kind of necessary challenge, really, for finding our authentic voice.
Okay, so what's the final, maybe provocative thought you want to leave our listeners with? Something they can take away and apply to their own challenges.
Lamott says that to truly find your voice, you absolutely must go through the one forbidden door in the castle. The one you've been warned your entire life never ever to open. You have to take the risk of exposing what she calls the bleak, unspeakable stuff, the parts of yourself that feel like your own personal monster. We put so much energy into keeping that door bolted shut, right? Convinced that if anyone saw what was behind it, we'd be totally alone, rejected forever. But what happens, she says, is that when people finally do shine a light on their own personal monster, we discover just how incredibly similar our shared human messiness actually is. You simply cannot make a true connection if you keep that one door locked tight, no matter how clever your plots are or how perfect your sentences seem. You have to risk it. Because that shared humanity, that vulnerability, that's what lets us keep dancing through life, even when inevitably we stumble and fall down sometimes.